Today we're going to be talking about some values. We're going to be talking about our values. And so no matter where you are or when you're watching this, I would love it if you would put your name and where you're from in the chat. And what do you consider to be your primary value? One of mine is integrity. I am as good as my word, and that's important to me, to keep my word. So that's what I mean by values. You know, I grew up in the military, and so I was the new kid a lot. And what I learned was that I had better learn how to fit in pretty quickly. And so I learned to mimic other people's accents. Actually, you'll find that if I'm with somebody with an accent, I unconsciously mimic the accent after a few minutes. I've worked very hard on not doing that, so I don't know how much I do it anymore, but often that just kind of comes into my language, and it's because I grew up needing to be a little bit of a chameleon, able to make myself fit into whatever boxes that current culture needed me to be in order for me to be accepted. Now that's a skill, and it has served me well, and it can go too far. If we're recreating who we are for other people, then that's not something that I find myself comfortable doing anymore. What I found out later on in years was that the reason I often didn't fit in was because I wasn't sure what their values were. Each different school I went to had a different set of values. And whether I agreed with them or not, if I could not share them, that defined really whether I fit in. That guides unconscious behaviors. And so when we moved to an area that was extremely wealthy, and the families had been there literally for generations, the nuns could tell the people in my class where their parents had sat in her class. The value that was being held had to do with longevity, and it had to do with wealth. Now, I couldn't make myself part of that. So that explains a part of why I never quite got comfortable in that particular school. In other cases, you know, you find that you and the people you have just gotten to know click really well, and it's partially because you share values. I'm remembering right now that there's a Dolly Parton quotation that I love that says, "A bird and a fish can fall in love, but where will they live?" A bird and a fish can fall in love, but where will they live? And studies have shown that a successful relationship, especially a successful marriage, often depends more on having shared values than shared interests. So he could be all or she could be all athletic. One spouse could be totally into their team and whatever sport they're into, and the other one much prefers something artistic or, you know, classical music as opposed to reggae. It doesn't really matter so long as they share values. That's what allows them to work. So last week we talked about creating relationships and how to get over what might look like a chasm between two people or two cultures or even ourselves and spirit. So this week we're talking about, because we have that cosmic connection, it allows us to solidify relationships, to start remembering, as I was taught, that love is the truth between all souls. That's a basic spiritual truth in our philosophy, that love is the truth between all souls. Now that can be love, the experience and the choice to value. It can also mean capital L love, which is the divine, one of the names that we hold for the divine. If that divine being is the truth between our souls, then we have something in common. And if that's what we focus on and that's what we value, then everything else falls away. So it doesn't matter where you're watching this from. It doesn't matter when you're watching this. If love is the truth between our souls, and love is that thing that is beyond space and time, which is what Celia just sang about, then we have a truth between our souls, and it doesn't really matter what else is going on. There is a soul conversation going on right now. And it's going on underneath the words, and it's going on underneath the music and between the notes. And it is telling the truth. It is the truth being told by the God within me about the God within you. And all we're talking about is our divine truth. This is what allows us to light these candles. See, I can share in the values of Native Americans and all of the goddess traditions and the more traditional in Western culture Christianity and the Abrahamic religions, which includes Judaism and Islam. I can share in the values of Buddhism and Hinduism and all of the others, whether we lit a candle for them or not. Because the truth of all mystical traditions is that the one primary value is oneness. We all recognize, as Ernest Holmes said in the Science of Mind textbook, there is one nature diffused throughout all nature, one God incarnated in all peoples. This is what we have in common. And if we value that oneness, this is what creates that bridge between people, and it's a bridge that truly does last. Because that oneness is eternal. That oneness can't be changed. It doesn't matter whether you like that other person that is also God, whether you like how they make their food, whether they put ketchup on everything, or there's some kind of foodie and it's all about the 20 different spices that you can talk about for 3 hours. If we understand that it's the oneness that we all have as a primary value, it becomes much easier to find common ground, to build a bridge that will actually last, because it's not built on whose team won the Super Bowl or the Stanley Cup or the whatever. It's built on something real and eternal. So I would suggest to you that even when we are fighting about silly stuff, and when we're fighting about stuff that really matters, what we're fighting about often is not what we're really fighting about. So as one of my degrees was in marriage and family counseling. And one of the first things we learned was that couples were never fighting about toilet paper or toilet seats or who did the dishes. People simply aren't that petty, frankly. We don't really care that much. And yet, people will get divorces and disown members of their family. And they'll say it was because, once again, you weren't pulling your weight when it came to the chores. As a matter of fact, when I was an undergrad, my boyfriend and his mom invited me to a family therapy session with them, which was interesting. I have never done that before or since. And they spent an entire hour and a half arguing about whose job it was to do the dishes before they went to bed. And it all devolved down to the youngest person in the room, and really it was, they spent an hour and a half arguing about this. And at the end, somebody asked me my opinion. And honestly, as I sit here now, the only question I could have asked was, how much are you therapists charging? Because I'll do the dishes for that. I will drive down from wherever I am and do your dishes. If that was really what was important, that would have solved everything. But what they were really talking about, as I look back over the years, they were talking about who is responsible for the good of this family, who is responsible for nurturing this family. And frankly, both parents had checked out. There was just some stuff going on, and the parents weren't able to be there. And so everything devolved onto the youngest person, who was made the scapegoat in many different ways. Now, that's not odd in families. I don't know about you, but my family put the fun back in dysfunctional. We just did. And so thank God for my parents. I learned a lot of valuable lessons. They did the best they could. I learned some values that I then had to take a really good, hard, long look at and decide, does that work for me? I remember the first time a therapist told me, just because those were your parents' values does not mean you have to hold the same ones. So think about that for a second. I have never met anyone who still follows all of the rules that they were raised with. I don't know about you, but I am no longer required to be in bed at 7:30 in the morning or get up and put on my school uniform at a certain time. That's not how I live today. And yet we treat some rules, which reflect certain values, as if they were sacred. This is what we call sacred cows. And I went to school in Vermont, so I know how to go about cow tipping. As a matter of fact, I would suggest for those of you who are meat eaters, it might be time for a sacred burnt offering, also known as steaks at a barbecue. So long as it's the sacred cow that you are eating. That's quite the image, and I'm just going to have to move on now. So if the values that you were raised with are not working for you, it might be time to take a good hard look at what values are driving your behavior. I can tell you that at the Centers for Spiritual Living worldwide, we have shared values that include diversity and inclusivity, that include financial responsibility, that include oneness, that include love and acting in a loving way toward all of our neighbors, no matter who they are. And we aren't perfect, but we strive to live those values as an international organization. And this year has been perfect because it taught us where we weren't quite applying the values we say we're espousing. It gave us a chance to really look long and hard at that truth. The values that are held by the Center for Spiritual Living, here in Prescott, Arizona, they're actually written right there on the building, on the wall as you walk in. You look up and you see 4 words. And many of you who know the Center for Spiritual Living in Prescott are probably trying to remember what the last 2 are right now. It's okay. It's kind of like remembering all 7 dwarves. But those particular values are love, joy, spiritual growth, and inclusivity. So if we acknowledge that those are the values that we're trying to live, we will not be humanly perfect at all of them all the time. I'm going to let myself off the hook for that because perfectionism is no longer one of my values. So love and joy are the beingness values. That's who we be. Instead of being human doings, we are human beings. And what we choose to be is the epitome of capital L love and capital J joy. Now, I talked about what love means. Love is seeing the God in everyone, seeing the divine being by whatever name you use for it in the existence of every other person, every other being on the planet. That's the value. For some people, it means because I see God in all beings, I cannot eat meat. For other people, it means because I see God in all beings, it's really important to me to be ending homelessness. For other people, it might be because I see God in all beings and I recognize our oneness and that love is the truth between our souls, I need to go back and apologize to that person I just snapped at. Because it's not okay for God to be grinching at God about God. That simply isn't going to happen. And so if love is one of my primary values, I am guided by this value to live in peace with all beings. Now, Mohandas Gandhi is a great example and has been followed by many people in trying to live from true love. This is called satyagraha or ahimsa. Those are 2 words that aren't exactly the same. But ahimsa we usually translate as loving kindness. It is this same loving kindness, that refusal to be at odds with people or cruel to people anyway, that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King picked up on and began using here during the civil rights movement back in the 60s. Satyagraha is a way, as I understand it, is a way of saying, I refuse to have opponents even in my mind. I have no opponents. You and I are not at odds just because you are acting like or you believe that we are at odds. There are people out there that say that a woman cannot be a minister and women should be silent in the church. They are not my opponent. I may not be their minister. I may not be the right minister for them, and that's okay. You know, there's a lot of CSLs around the world, and there's an awful lot of ministers. I want to say we're coming up on 1,000 now. I am not the right minister for every single person. There are other colleagues that I have that absolutely will make a heart connection with people that I don't. And that is as it should be. When you go to a practitioner, you should put at least as much effort into finding your right practitioner as you do in finding your right mechanic or your right hairdresser or your right realtor. Not everybody is going to meet at the human level in the same way. And that's okay. That is wonderful and perfect. God loves infinite variety. And so love being one of our primary values means that we can see the value of each and every person's inherent value. It doesn't mean we have to agree with everything they do. Joy is another one of our being values. Joy is not the same as happiness, and I want to make sure we're clear on that. Joy is a quality of the divine. It does not depend on whether my team won the playoffs. It doesn't depend on whether somebody just gave me the perfect gift or somebody was nice to me and complimented my hair, shoes, lipstick, whatever. Joy is the awareness that the divine has got this. Joy is the reveling and the richness of life. And it doesn't matter what exactly it's showing up as, which can create happiness. Joy is that internal sense of good. That sense of I am loved, that the love of the divine lives in me, and therefore I am supported. God's got my back, however you want to say it. Joy is that sense of well-being that is not rocked by what's going on out in the world. It doesn't matter who wins the election. You can still have joy. It doesn't matter who the person you thought was your dream partner back in the 7th grade ends up married to. You can still have joy. And because that will not necessarily be affected by, not really, what's going on out in the world, that's an intrinsic, inherent value that we can all live by and live with. Now, I say that the other two values that we hold, spiritual growth and inclusivity, are how we behave. That's what we do. So love and joy are beingness. Spiritual growth and inclusivity are how that shows up in the world as us. It's how we choose to behave. Now, I will admit right here and now that spiritual growth will not always be fun. Growth has the word ow right in the middle of it. And so while it can feel very good, and while it long term allows us to be more in touch with our joy, in the moment, it might tick you right off. It might look like me or some other practitioners telling you what you never wanted to hear. I'll never forget the first time a practitioner I was sitting with, who also happened to be my best friend at the time, told me that my intelligence didn't matter. Because we were on church property and because I knew that she was a practitioner, I could not smack her, which is probably good. But what she was saying was that my worth was inherent, and if I lost my intelligence or my ability to speak wisely tomorrow, it wouldn't matter. I would still have inherent goodness. Some people in our culture think that our worth is defined by our financial means. That's not true either. Spiritual growth requires that we let go of all of those outside definitions of what makes us okay, what makes us good enough, and step into this intrinsic goodness, this intrinsic sense that our joy is assured, that we are loved is assured. And so we can act from the overflow of that good rather than from guilt or shame or fear. So that's spiritual growth. And it might look like sometimes that spiritual growth is in opposition to joy. So we need to be very clear about what those two terms mean. Spiritual growth might require you to take on some behaviors that you weren't excited about at first. If I talk about tithing as a spiritual practice I love, I can see people backing away slowly because it sounds like I just want your money, and that is not the truth. It is one spiritual practice that works for me. I don't particularly like journaling. But there have been times in my life where my spiritual growth required that I sit down and write out a spiritual learning or enact that spiritual discipline for my own growth. And finally, inclusivity. We are a center that includes people of all different ages, of all political persuasions. We are straight and gay and gender fluid. We are black and white and brown and purple. And knowing us, we probably have some polka dotted people because we tend to be the creative ones who like to be a little wild. We have conservatives and progressives. We have men and women. We have all of it, and all of it is welcome. We may not be okay with every behavior. You cannot come into our sanctuary and start espousing white supremacy without expecting a reaction and a request that that behavior stop. But as we get further and more deeply into inclusivity, what I find is that the biases and the unconscious belief systems that I have been holding and that we as a society have been holding, those get triggered. And that is my opportunity to look at, do those values actually serve me? Would I rather hold inclusivity as a primary value or my superiority? There's an old question about would you rather be right or happy? That can end many, many arguments. So think about the things you're fighting about with other people, that other people might have signed on to have these discussions with you simply so that each of you can figure out what is the value you share and how can you both move forward using that value to create greater peace in your relationship, to remember that love is the truth between all souls. I invite you right now to stop and think about for a moment, if you are part of the Center for Spiritual Living here in Prescott, can you fully espouse those 4 values? Or do you need to redefine them to work for you? Do you need to add something? Do you need to hold something as something, if joy doesn't feel like one of your primary values, are you willing for that to be part of your community? And so we have learned over this past year that while we might think our joy comes from being together physically, maybe that's just our happiness. We are very happy getting together and eating together and hanging out together, and we're heading into the holiday season with a lot of American holidays that many people celebrate from different faiths. What if, while our happiness comes from many of the traditions, our joy comes from something deeper? What if the spiritual growth that we claim to want, and some days I do and some days I don't, I will admit it right now. Some days I very cheerfully get up and go do my spiritual practice, and other days I just roll over and grinch into my pillow. What if our joy comes from really doing spiritual work and finding other ways to connect with people like this recording? What if it matters far more that people share and learn what our spiritual tools are than they learn it right here in Prescott? Do we actually need credit for people getting their lives transformed and people learning these tools? Or is it more important, is the value really that the tool is getting used? That is something most ministers are going to have to grapple with at some point, because yes, we have egos that say, I want my numbers to be big. I want to shine. And you know what? It would be nice if I levitated just a little so that everybody knew that I was the holy person in the room. Let me tell you that actual ministry will wear that away very quickly, if you're very lucky. It's far more important that all of us remember that our shared value with all mystic traditions is oneness. That the highest God and the innermost God are the same God, no matter how they express in the world. And what we do within this community is pray. This is how we contact love and joy. This is part of the work we do that creates spiritual growth, and it allows us to include spirit in our everyday lives. That too is inclusivity. And so I invite you right now to simply be comfortable wherever you are. And if closing your eyes helps you, go ahead. If keeping them open helps you, awesome. I'm going to close mine because it helps me focus. And what I know in this moment is that God, this spirit that goes by so many names, is eternal, ineffable, and all that is. There is a single power and presence that has taken form as this universe and everything in it. This one power, this one presence is the very essence of love. It is the very essence of peace. It is wholeness, meaning that there is nothing missing and nothing extra. Everything that shows up within this wholeness, within this definition of perfect, that is all God, and it is all entirely necessary to the continued existence of this universe. And so I rest in that, and I remember that we too, I am also part of that. That this is the very essence of who I am. And so as I speak these words, I'm actually speaking them on behalf of all humanity, and especially the people who can hear me right now. But I'll use the first person and ask that those hearing me right now try and take these words for your own and see how they fit. Because if I am one with God, then all good must be available to me. The highest and best good, which is oneness with the Most High, is already my truth. Love is already the truth of my own soul, my magnificent soul. And therefore, anything I have looked out into my physical world and found wanting or less than is actually simply coming to pass, not to stay. Because the essence of this soul, the essence of my soul, the essence of every face of spirit is absolute good. And so that which doesn't serve me, I simply let go of and allow itself to be replaced by a higher level of good, a deeper understanding of what spirit is, allowing that spaciousness to grow within me, and seeing a greater, brighter light that is the truth of my being. The Holy Spirit is truly right here, right now, in this very place. And all healing happens right here and right now because God is. And God is still all there is. This is the ultimate healing. This is the ultimate good. And I am so grateful that this is how spirit, how God works, has always worked, will always work. According to the law of cause and effect. The cause is the infinite knowing of God. The cause in this moment is that we're standing witness to a higher truth, that I stand witness to the highest truth about all of us. I'm so grateful that this is what spirit is, and it's so much better and bigger and juicier than anything I ever gave it credit for. And so I just relax into this, knowing that my word has gone forth. It is being enacted by the law, by the infinite good, according to Spirit's will. I call it all good and very good. And so it is. Amen.